Hey y'all, it's Laura and welcome to day 17 of my Scraptember video a day marathon. This is going up a day late as I'm getting caught up now that I finally have my voice back. This is a collaboration with the Scrappy Sisters and Christy's Beautiful Life with our special guest, Jackie Malzahn. Now for today's layout, there was a sketch at the beginning, and that's actually a sketch that I created, which is very exciting to be able to use one of my own sketches. And today's Scraptember prompt is sequins. Now I'm going to be doing something slightly different with sequins this time because I don't use sequins super often. So I'm mostly going to be using them as scattering. Now, I'm not sure how this grid paper is showing up on your screen, but it's a little wild on mine, and I knew it was going to do that. And so you'll see pretty quickly I keep it kind of covered up so that it calms down with my camera and doesn't do the crazy wave thing that can make you feel a bit queasy. So what we're scrapping today is this 4x6 photo of my oldest son who is shopping and he's picking out clothes. As he is turning 18 next year, so he just turned 17 this year, he has to start doing some of these things on his own. And so we are slowly integrating that into our teaching him life skills, we'll say. Now, I couldn't decide how the papers needed to go or what papers I wanted to use, so I created a little compilation here. I'll show you in just a second, where I flipped through the options. Started out with this navy gray and peach, changed that to navy, peach, and this wood grain, and then eventually settled on no gray, navy, green map paper, and blue wood grain. But to save you from watching me spend probably a good 10 minutes flipping through the different options in the kit, I wanted to use all of the papers, guys. I don't know why, but I was just thinking all of the papers. I love them all. This is fairly early in the September kit when I'm scrapping this one, so there were so many options and I was having trouble picking them. But I am very happy with what I settled on, and to create this sort of stair-step design that the sketch calls for behind my photo, I am going to go ahead and just cut out the papers, mark it out with my pencil, and then just cut it out with my paper trimmer. And because I only have a little scrap there of that blue wood grain in the background, that one will just paper piece onto the edges. But the others, I didn't mind using big chunks of paper here because, again, I'm early in the kit and I find myself more willing to use larger chunks of paper at the beginning of a kit, whereas at the end, I tend to be a little bit more skimpy with how I use my paper. And you'll find me hiding little bits and pieces behind the layers at that point. So I love this blue wood grain. It actually it was left over from my August stash kit, and it was just sitting on my desk. It was just this last little scrap, and I thought, you know what, let's use it. Let's get it in here, and it worked perfectly for this boy layout. Now, I do love this grid in the background. It's from Felicity Jane. I do remember that, and it is a very cool background for something this linear because you can line up the papers in the background on the grid, and it's so easy to get it perfectly straight right off the bat, which can be tricky when you are using just a regular white cardstock background. Trying to get things perfectly straight is so hard, but when you've got a grid background, easy peasy lemon squeezy. I love that. Love little tricks like that. So I'm going to add a couple of little strips of two of the papers down here at the bottom, just like in the sketch, but where I'm going to deviate heavily is with my title, because in the sketch it just calls for a little banner off to the right side of that bottom piece and a little title. I'm going to go for a big title that stretches across the entire bottom of it. Why? Because I have the paper space to do it. I have the room. So I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that. Now I am going to go ahead and outline all of my paper layers here. Yes, I am outlining on top of a grid background. No, you can't really notice it on the grid itself, but you see it in between the paper layers. And that's really what I was going for. The purpose for outlining is to create a bit of a shadow behind your layers, and that gives it more of a 3D effect, the appearance of dimension, without actually adding any extra bulk to your layout. And so now it has more of a pop, a 3D look, even though it's very, very flat. Doing the same to the paper strips at the bottom, just mimicking that same look. And I really like the way that that works. I think that really adds a lot to the layout, and it's a very subtle, easy thing to do. Now, from the sketch, you may remember there was a scattering of hearts down the left side of the photo. Now, because this is a boy layout, I do tend to go for circles or stars. And so this time we're going to use stars, and I'm leaning into a Bella Boulevard ephemera collection pretty heavily. And this one, I want to say it is either Make Your Mark or All Stars, something like that. I think it's the star one just because it's full of stars, and it works beautifully. It has a nice collection of different sizes and colors, and I really liked the big pop of the black and white stars on these colorful background. I think it works really, really well. I also found this really nice white banner piece. I thought this would be perfect for the little banners that pop out the side of the layering. Now, this may be a detail you might have missed if you first look at the sketch and just sort of glance at it. You may not even notice these little banner pieces coming out the side. But what these do is give an extra little linear base, and it kind of ties the papers together. It makes it feel more like a cohesive piece rather than just layers on top of each other. See how much of a difference that little banner piece makes? Bam! It feels like one big solid piece behind your photo. It's little details like that that make such a difference on a layout. You may have noticed too that my sketch at the beginning is in multiple colors. The reason for that is so that you can see all of these individual layers and differentiate which papers go where. Because if you're like me and are a little neurodivergent, i.e., have ADHD and have trouble with depth perception, flat images like sketches that are in black and white can be really tricky for me to look at and use because I can't always tell which layers come first, and I just kind of have to guess. And sometimes I get it wrong. So by putting the sketch in colors, it's very clear what layer goes on top of what, and those little details stand out a whole lot more. So to add on to these little die cut stars, I decided to punch out some gold glitter stars from this beautiful gold glitter paper. I've had several people request some videos and ideas on how to use glitter paper in particular. This is my main way. Punching out shapes is the easiest and the most common way that I use glitter paper, but I will be using it in a lot of different ways this month, don't you worry. So you'll have lots of examples of how to use it, and I will probably compile all of the layouts that I use this gold glitter paper on for a product play later, so you can reference that if you're specifically looking for how to use gold glitter paper. Now here come the sequins. Some of these are punched stars out of glitter paper and gold foil paper, but I have some teeny tiny little gold sequins mixed in here as well that are also in a star shape. And so I'm going to sprinkle those over by the die cut stars on the left side in just a minute. So those will come back. But first I wanted to put some word phrases to the right of the photo. Again, that's in the sketch. And then I put some gold glitter stars next to those word phrases to make them pop. And here is my title. I'm using some Hip Kit alphas that are left over from a very old kit. And I'm going to be using Find Your Style as my title across the bottom because my son isn't super picky about clothes, and having to shop for himself has definitely been a challenge of him having to make decisions, because quite normally he'll say, oh, you just pick out some shirts for me because you know what I like, which I do. He's not super picky and just likes t-shirts with memes and like snarky sayings and stuff. That's really easy. But when you're in the store and you're staring down a giant pile of t-shirts and you have to dig through and find what you like in the size you need, that's trickier, and that's something I want him to be able to do. He is autistic, but he is very high functioning and has a great time most of the time with taking care of self-care. But this is something that he does find a bit tricky, and so we are practicing it now while he is in this photo a couple of years ago, but we're still practicing it at 17 to make sure he's ready to handle it when he's out on his own. tone. Now, I decided I really wanted something a little extra underneath of my photos. I felt like it needed a little base underneath of it. It was just kind of hanging out there, being the tallest piece of this layered background. And so I felt like it needed a little bit of something underneath of it, a little shelf, if you will, to sit on. And so I decided to go ahead and pull this piece of washi out of my kit, and then I'm going to put it on some white cardstock so that it's not see-through, because I don't want that grid in the background to come through and kind of block out the washi so you can't see it. So putting it on white cardstock makes it so that it's very opaque and it stands out on its own just like a paper strip. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck that here right underneath of the navy blue paper, and it creates a nice little base underneath of my photo, and I really like how that helps it just feel as though it's supported. I know that sounds a little silly because it's paper on paper, but in my brain it makes sense that it needs to be supported. So adding in these die cut stars at the top, I've got my punch stars, going to punch a couple more out of that wood grain paper just to use it up so that scrap is completely gone, and then making a little cluster at the bottom right alongside my title, because again, in the sketch there was a nice little cluster here at the bottom right, and I've decided to go ahead and mimic that. Now here's where I'm pulling out the teeny tiny little sequins at the bottom of this container of punched stars. They are itty bitty. You will see them maybe in the photos at the end. They're tiny. They're about the size of a Nuvo drop. And they're very hard to pick up, as sequins typically are. And so I'm going to go ahead and use those to fulfill the Scraptember prompt for day 17, and just sort of spread those around amidst these stars. Now you may be wondering why I put this cluster of stars in the sketch to begin with. And the reason for that is because I've created such a linear background with these layers of paper, it needed something a bit whimsical to soften those hard lines and edges. And by doing this scattered clustering down the left side, it does just that. It softens up the hard lines and makes it feel just a little bit more whimsical. Finishing up with some Nuvo drops and some Heidi Swap Color Shine, as always, for my scattering and splattering. And that's it for today. Be sure to check out the links below, and until next time, bye!